The first thing you need to know, my name is Louisa Dykstra and I'm a parent volunteer. So I am not an expert in this topic. My job was to learn from the experts and put it into sort of a format where people could learn at least the overview of how it works. So we do have a few experts in the room. Margaret Buckton is from Iowa School Finance Information Services. There might be other acronyms that I'll have to ask you as we go through. So she is the subject matter expert where I got all of this information. You're welcome to come and sit down. I'm assuming you're one of the experts, right? That actually knows this topic?
Thomas Harper from the CFO for Des Moines Schools.
Thank you. And Cindy Ellsburn, current school board member. So with that said, we decided to put this together because the Des Moines School Board started the Legislative Action Team as a way to say, okay, parents, when we get upset about something, we generally show up at the school board meeting because something's not going well in the school, we disagree with a change that's been made in a program. And the school board said what we really need to do is take a step back and have people really get involved more at the state legislature level, where the decisions are made about how much funds the school board has to work with. So that's where we're going with this, because when you actually know how the system works, then we can be a much more effective advocate. So it can be kind of confusing. When we start, like the title of the presentation, why are we buying all new laptops and cutting teachers? Or in this case, the middle school in Charles City, that this is part of their lunchroom, really cool. It's a space for kids to be creative, for them to have some time to themselves if they need, but then you see that in the news and people say, well, hold on, are schools strapped for buying books, or are they loaded and can, do all these kind of cool things? So it can get kind of confusing. So learning how in the world it works, when I first sat down with Margaret, I said, well, okay, so hold on. I thought, we pay our property taxes and then the school takes that money and does their thing. And if you need to build a new building, you issue a bond, right? And she said, that's how it worked in 1967. So fairly straightforward, right? Property taxes, a little bit of bond issue if you needed, a few other things that came into play, maybe some grants, that kind of thing. So the way that it works today looks more like this. So we're not going to go too much into detail right yet into this presentation, because first I want to talk about how did we get from that very simple pie chart to this one. So think about that pie chart that we saw, right? The property taxes go to the schools. What are some possible downfalls of that system? Right. So you're going to end up with some schools that are in maybe really property-rich areas, and then you're going to end up with some schools that have, in the case of Des Moines, a lot of tax-exempt property in their area, a higher population for property value, that kind of thing. And so you ended up with quite a bit of disparity in what different schools were able to do. And sometimes I think the opinions of, the better schools are all in the suburbs, sometimes that's kind of a holdover from 40 or 50 years ago when there was a wide variety in what was available to them. So in an effort to make things more equitable between rural and urban and suburban schools, in 1967, it became a statewide per pupil spending limit. Now, initially, that was done on a kind of an auto-calculated formula. So based on, cost of inflation, cost of benefits, that kind of thing, kind of determined an automatic increase in that state cost per pupil. In the mid-90s, that was taken off of the auto-calculate and put into the legislature and the governor's job to set it as part of the budget each year. Now, I'm generally an optimist when it comes to people, so I believe that most politicians go into public service because they do have a desire to serve. And I understand that if I had to get thousands of people to rehire me every 2 years, it would probably slow down my ability to do my job. So it's one of those democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others situations, right? But so what we have is that state politics is now what determines a lot of our school funding. So let's take a look at how that has worked for us. You can see on this, there's a line in the middle that shows, so that the part on the left is when it was driven on that AutoCalc formula. And then over on the right, you see how that annual increase has gone since the legislature and the governor took over. So in 6 out of the last 7 years, the increase that we were given did not keep up with the cost of doing business. So everybody knows what happens if you get, say, a 2% raise at your job and your cost of health insurance, daycare, groceries, all of that's going up 5 or 6% on a year. It doesn't work, right? You end up having to continually cut things. And if that happens year after year after year, then the amount of things you're able to do in your family budget goes down. So that is a general look. One of the questions that we often get is what percentage of the state budget is education? Sometimes I've heard people say, well, 60% of our state budget goes towards education. And my favorite one that we heard this last legislative session was, well, the majority of new money that's coming in is going toward education. Okay, so what does that actually mean? And how do we compare to some of the states around the country? And so this is one where, Margaret, you're going to have to remind me what NASBO stands for.
The National Association of State Budget Officers.
Thank you. So those people did a state expenditure report. So comparing K-12, because sometimes education funding, it includes the post-secondary, all that kind of stuff. But so K through 12 compared to total state spending, national average is at 19.3. Taking just the Plain States region closer into us is 19.7. If you kind of take an exemplar that's close to us, Minnesota runs at about 25.2. Iowa right now is at 16.3. Just to give you a perspective of what percentage of our state budget right now is going toward education. So let's go back to this. How in the world did we get to this mess? It's one thing to say, okay, we're going to sort of level it out across all districts, but then it's another to get to this situation where funding is allocated for specific purposes. So you'll see across the top, you still have the property taxes, right? That was the main source of funding that we used to get. But you also have this other stuff. You have state aid, the income surtax, sales tax, federal funds, and then you have all of these buckets. And state law prohibits something in this bucket from being spent on anything in that bucket. So that means that, come on in, have a seat. That means that there's a lot less flexibility in what the district is actually allowed to do. So, and then for instance, let's take just this general fund. Actually, even within the general fund, there are tons of rules about what gets to be spent for what. So there's, this amount of money is allotted for dropout prevention. This amount of money has to be the early literacy. This is the teacher leadership. So when the money is given to the districts by the state, there are so many silos that determine where it needs to be spent. So looking back at that question of why would we be buying new laptops and cutting teacher positions, you're going to see technology would be coming out of this budget, whereas the staff would be coming out of a totally separate budget. So the district doesn't have the option to decide, this is more priority to us, so we're going to take money that's allocated for technology and move it over into staff. They don't have that option. Okay, and so again, why? How did we get there? Why is it so complicated? Getting back a little bit into politics, one thing, of course, any tax break is always going to be popular with the public. And so property tax relief has been kind of a hot topic, always very popular. So 30 years ago, the property taxes covered 70% of the cost of schools. And then the state did a supplemental 30% to make it equitable. Now that has flipped, and 30% is covered by property taxes and 70% is covered by the state. So that just means more has to come out of the state budget, which means more has to get approved. And then honestly, dealing with politics, if you're going to put out a campaign brochure that says we increased the school funding from 2.15% to 3.25%, that doesn't look as sexy on a campaign brochure. So that's where you start to get some of these monies allocated for very specific things. They want to talk about preschool. They want to talk about STEM initiatives. They want to talk about third graders reading. They want a specific cause that they have advocated for as a legislator. And then lastly, simply because the money's coming from the state doesn't want to give the local districts the control to spend it as much as they want. They kind of want it to be spent on what they want it to be spent on. So what do? That's why this group has formed, again, so that because a lot of times we're generally like, come on, the schools need more money. But then we don't know the background behind what we're even asking for to be able to make an intelligent request. And like we talked about, you see like, well, my goodness, the school just got all these new laptops and doesn't look to me like the school needs more money. It just gets really confusing when we're trying to advocate. So a lot of us are advocating on behalf of our own kids. I have kids in the Des Moines schools, but even for those that don't have kids, we know that how much that affects our state economy, our quality of life, our ability to attract businesses because of the education their kids are going to get. So the district employs lobbyists. The teachers union tends, they have more of a voice. But legislators really, really want to hear from citizens. And especially for all of us, if we can get to know our legislator, where when our voice comes in, when we maybe write a handwritten letter, when we do a phone call, it can be incredibly powerful because there are very, very few people who actually understand this stuff. You guys in the room pretty much know more than probably some of the state legislators now about how this works. So when we use our voices, it can be much more powerful than just sort of the general, hey, we need you to put more value on education kind of thing when we have a more specific request. So with that in mind, the Legislative Action Team, which again, what that is, the Des Moines School Board started it as just kind of a committee of the school board. It's made up completely of parent volunteers. So the little half sheet handout that you have is information about us. So we take the school board's legislative priorities and decide where can we have an impact. So again, rather than trying to move the ball forward on the general state supplemental aid percentage growth, what we're looking at is where are some opportunities that we have to make a significant difference for the Des Moines district. So one of them that we're talking about this year is going to be pre-K, which is again one of the boxes kind of within that general fund. And we also know that every dollar spent on preschool education saves the district, I think I've heard $7 down the road. When you have kids that any kindergarten teacher, I'm looking at a lot of you guys, will tell you which kids, just by looking, have had preschool and which kids haven't, because there's a pretty big difference coming into the classroom. So that's one area where we can have impact. And then the second one is the statewide penny. So, and in this case, again, we might be thinking, well, what if we wanted to advocate for more money over here? So if we go after this statewide penny, which that right now is, buildings, equipment, technology, that kind of thing. We know that we have buildings in the Des Moines system that still need more secure entrances, that need just general updating. If you had 2,000 middle school kids through your house every day, you'd probably need to do some upkeep on the building. So if we can get the legislature to extend that, then that frees up money that this district can use for other things where it has more flexibility. So that is what we are aiming for this year. And again, you have the cards in front of you. But as far as what we really, really want is just to have people that are on our mailing list aware of what we're doing. So if you're able to come to some of the planning meetings, that's great. But we really just want to have more Des Moines parents and community members on this mailing list so that when there is an issue before the legislature, that we can say, all right, right now we need them to get phone calls and to get letters and just to really keep people more informed about that. So as far as events coming up, on December 10th, we'll have our first breakfast with members of the Legislative Action Team, which is all of you if you want to be, and our Central Iowa legislators. And then we'll continue that once a month. We'll have those breakfasts so that we can, again, stay more in contact with them so that they're hearing about Des Moines school issues, not just from the district lobbyists, but they're hearing from their constituents who are saying, no, we're informed. We know what's going on. We know what we need. We know why. And we want to make sure that you hear our voice. So, and the other big thing that you can do, those of you that are here, is share this kind of idea with other people that you're talking to. When they start talking about school funding, say, oh, you know what? I did learn that, this is why they can't spend the money that's allocated for laptops on teacher salaries and this kind of thing. And get more people on our mailing list. So again, this is just the website on the DesMoinesSchools.org site. And you join our mailing list on that little spot, and then also there's the Facebook group that just to keep informed. And I think at this point, I'll take a breath. I will stop and ask for questions and comments.